Welcome back to our life. You know the drill. We're reading. It's time for dinner. Sunlight shone through the windows as you sat in your living room, your home phone pressed to your ear. Cove was on the other end. It'd been shaping up to be an ordinary day like any other, until Cove had called unexpectedly. He sounded unusually nervous to greet you. You listened silently as he kept talking, his words stilted.
So, I was just wondering, do you want to come over to my house for dinner tonight?
The question came out strangely, almost like he'd rehearsed it a few times beforehand. Your eyes widened a little. You hadn't expected this to be the reason behind the call. Yeah, I'll go.
It was, huh?
Oh. It seemed like Cove still had more to say, and you had just interrupted him. Oops.
Cool, well,
He stumbled for a bit, trying to gather his thoughts again.
my mom and dad, they really want you to be there if your parents don't have a problem with it. They asked me to ask you.
This sounds suspicious. You took a moment to think. Dinner at home would be quiet and uneventful today. If you really wanted to, you could go to Cove's instead. Cove spoke up again, breaking your thought train. His voice was softer than before. Thought train? Wouldn't you say train of thought? Anyways.
Also, I want you to be there too. Can you come over, I mean?
Yeah, I can come.
Thanks, Jamie. I'll let them know when I can.
He sounded noticeably relieved by your response. Was you coming over for your dinner today that serious? He spoke to you for a little while longer to explain what time to come over and other details, then hung up. And that was that, for now anyway. Soon enough, the sun dipped out of the sky and evening came. It was time for you to head to Cove's house. After letting Elizabeth know you were leaving, she didn't look away from the TV, just grunted. You made the small journey across the street. You knocked a couple times on the heavy door to their condo. As you waited for an answer, you found yourself contemplating being a guest while both of Cove's parents were there. Definitely apprehensive. That gives me social anxiety, man. You didn't know what to expect from this dinner party. You didn't get much time with your thoughts, though. The door opened soon enough. Cove's mom, Kira, stood in the frame, smiling warmly at you. Hey, Jamie, welcome. Please, come on in. She opened the door wider and moved to make room. You stepped inside, allowing her to shut it behind you. Your house is so pretty. I really enjoy it, and the colors. Thanks so much for coming over. I know it was kind of last second. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Of course. Just make yourself at home. It's not my home, but I've been given permission to say that.
Hey, Jamie, welcome to our humble abode.
You jerked your head towards the sound of Mr. Holden's voice. He waved at you briefly from the kitchen, with his back turned and a large spoon in hand.
Hope you're hungry, because I'm whipping up a lot of tasty stuff.
True to his word, you heard something sizzling on the stove. You closed your eyes and inhaled. It smelled spicy and savory. With Mr. Holden busy and Cove nowhere to be seen, it was just you and Kira. She gave you a wry smile. He sure is. Well, I've been barred from cooking the entire time I'm staying here. Can you believe that? She nudged you with an elbow. Mr. Holden scoffed good-naturedly, then spoke from over his shoulder.
You're on vacation, Kira. You need to accept that already.
She yelled back, amusement obvious on her face and in her tone. People still cook when they're on vacation. Everyone's gotta eat. It's not like I'm some celebrity who can go out for every meal or hire a private chef.
Sorry.
Well, in this house, you're a VIP.
Kira smiled and shook her head quietly. Then she turned to face you once more. Sorry about that, Jamie. Here I was, trying to strike up a conversation with you, and Cliff just had to butt in.
I don't butt in.
She eyed him, chuckling in disbelief. He wasn't exactly disproving her point with that. Kira leaned over to whisper to you. It's okay, he likes to be included, but since Clifford insisted on cooking all by himself, he'll have to wait. The two of us can chat. Her next question continued to be said in a hushed tone, just to be safe. So, how are you doing? I'm good. Kira didn't seem too convinced by her awkward phrasing, but she nodded anyway. She opened her mouth to say something more, but some lightly pounding footsteps caught your attention. You checked to see Cove emerge from the hall a few moments later. He might have heard all the commotion and left his room to see what was going on. He quickly took stock of the situation. His cheeks tinted pink at the sight of you standing in his living room, and his hand came up to rub his arm almost bashfully.
Jamie, you made it. Thanks for coming.
Cove's voice was unnaturally loud, as if he thought you wouldn't be able to hear him from where you were, only a few feet away. Hey, weirdo. Cove frowned at your playful greeting.
Weirdo?
Yeah, 'cause you're being all weird. He huffed but didn't deny it, which meant that he knew he was acting off too. It was when you glanced away from Cove that you spotted his parents watching the two of you interact. Cove noticed their stares too, meeting them with narrowed eyes.
Are we having dinner now? Not yet, bud. I'm still cooking.
Alright, I'm gonna go back to my room. As he turned to leave, he bent his head to the side to face you.
You coming?
The question was quiet, but you heard it clearly. He smiled, pleased that he asked, and nodded in the affirmative. Cove turned fully and made his way down the hall. Have fun, you two!
We'll call you when food's ready to go.
With that, you followed after Cove. The two of you made your way down the hall. I've probably been before, but not very often. Cove got to the door first, opening it and stepping aside. You joined him. There was a mat on the floor in front of the door. As you stepped over the threshold into his room, you felt the crunch of sand beneath your feet. Oh, I really enjoy his room. It looks really cool. I like his little collection and his little fish tank. Not enough books for my taste, but that's okay. Not everyone reads as much as I do. The sensation was nothing new to you, of course. Cove constantly came back to his room covered in sand, not bothering to clean himself off at the front door, and got it all over his personal space. That's just how he was, a little bit of a mess. You hadn't heard Mr. Holden ever scold him for it, not like your mom sort of if you've done it.
You can sit wherever you want.
Cove himself took a seat at the edge of his large bed, looking like the picture of comfort, and let you decide. I'm gonna sit next to Cove. As soon as you sat next to him, Cove grew tense. His back went stiff and he ducked his head away. He tried to hide a trembling smile. Aw.
Oh my god.
What? He said it under his breath as if he didn't want you to hear. You obviously did, and easily, since you were right beside him. I'll just kind of chuckle. He raised his eyebrows. You both kept noticing the other's every move. You're like an open book, you know that?
I'm not.
R2. Cove scowled before shifting nervously on the bed. He pointedly glanced away from you, the tips of his ears red. With the silence growing, your gaze began to drift. You stared at the bright fish swimming in the tank. There were a bunch of them, floating to and fro in the open space. They stood out starkly against the green aquarium plants. How long have you had those fish?
Yes. My dad bought them for me not very long after I moved here. I guess it's been years now.
Wow, that's a long time. You peered carefully into the tank. The fish looked to be doing well. He must take good care of them. Most of them were small, but there was one especially big one. What are their names?
I don't name them. Well, not really.
He lifted an eyebrow at that. He continued the explanation sheepishly.
Mostly I just call them things based on what they look like. Squirt for a small one, tangerine for a really orange one, that sort of thing. I've had a lot of fish and I'm not that good at coming up with names.
That's funny. Who knew that was a weakness of his? It was an entertaining revelation. Even names aren't that hard, just give them a random name, man. I even named plants.
Oh, a couple of them have other types of names.
He pointed to a small orangish red fish. It was minding its own business away from the others.
My dad named her Dreamcatcher, and the other one's Mark. Mom came up with that one.
Cove smiled to himself, his eyes reflecting the glow from the tank. You let other people name your fish?
Yeah, it's nice.
He then turned to you, tilting his head to the side. There was a considering look on his face.
Do you want to name one?
Yeah, I do! His smile grew a little at your enthusiasm.
Cool. There's a few who don't have names right now, the newer ones. You can pick which one you want to name.
He pointed each of the recent acquisitions out to you. The first of the smallish fish in the tank was completely orange and zipped all over the place, running laps around the others. The second was slightly bigger and red. Its tail was dotted in black with black spots, which almost resembled freckles. The last fish was the biggest one. Its multicolored scales rippled under the bright light of the tank as it slowly made its way across the vast expanse. You went with the medium fish. I'm the medium kid, so I picked the medium fish. Cove only nodded at your answer, waiting on you to decide on a suitable name. You watched the fish as you chose closely. Okay, sure, that sentence makes sense. As you did, a name eventually came to you. Frank. I can name it Cove. I want to name it Frank. Cove laughed unreservedly at your choice. It was affectionate rather than insulting.
You name things like my mom.
Alright, it's Frank. With that, his attention moved from you to the tank. He peered fondly at it and its inhabitants. You smiled proudly at Frank as it swam through the tendrils of the plants, disappearing, then reappearing soon after. You noticed then that Cove was sitting closer to you than he was before. You must have scooted over at some point during the conversation. This close, your shoulders were almost brushing against each other. Your heartbeat picked up a little at the realization. You know, I'm not allowed to have pets in my house, not even fish. Corners of Cove's lips turned down at that.
That doesn't sound fair. It's not like fish would make a mess of your house or anything. You just gotta take care of their tank and feed them and they'll be okay.
I don't mind it too much. Yeah, I'm not really an animal person, and while I would like something like a fish, it's okay. You have to do so much for a pet. It's a lot of work and responsibility. My moms take it super seriously, and that's why they don't want to just get one.
That's true.
Your current conversation brought to mind a memory from years ago. You launched into it without any warning, earning a brave, confused look from Cove. One time, Elizabeth, came back from playing at the beach and just shut herself in her room. She only came down for food, and then she ran back upstairs straight after. It was kind of weird. My mom didn't think much of it at first, though. But then that night, Mom went to her room to say goodnight and started screaming. Mom and I ran over to see what happened. Lizzie had this huge lizard in her arms. Cove's eyebrows rose at that, and he leaned forward in interest.
Really?
A lizard? Where'd that come from?
Elizabeth said she saw it half buried in the sand and didn't know what it was. Then she pulled it out and got the answer. So she brought it home. She hid the lizard in her room for most of the day because she wanted to keep it. Mom and Ma were not happy. They worried about putting it out during the night, but she was going to have to let it go in the morning. Lizzie was really upset. She didn't bring it back to the beach eventually, or she did, sorry, but she wouldn't talk to anyone for days. When she did get over it, it was almost like it never happened. You laughed thinking back to that time. Elizabeth has always been stubborn, but when she was younger, she forgot grudges quickly. Now it wasn't so easy. Cove had been quiet for most of the story, apart from the reveal of the lizard. He had a thoughtful look on his face.
I can't even imagine what it'd be like to have a sibling.
He gave serious thought to his statement before you told him. It's fun, there are ups and downs, you're lucky to be an only child. It's a nice idea in general. My sister is Elizabeth. There are ups and downs. There's ups and downs to every relationship. It's fun to have her there when she wants to be there, but now Elizabeth barely feels like hanging out with me. Cove pursed his lips at the words, considering them quietly for a while.
Cool.
That's interesting. I think your family's cool.
He didn't have much else to say, though while on the topic of your family, you considered your relationship with your moms, too. I get along with my moms. You had disagreements with them, but at the end of the day, you loved them and they loved you. That's what really mattered. I believe that's how most families are. I mean, you disagree and you might argue, but at the end of the day, you understand you're both trying to do what's best for the majority or what's best for you in this scenario. Well, say what you want about them, but at least your mom's never tried to pay someone to be your friend. Oh, I totally forgot about that. The thought prompted you to look over at Cove. You probably still didn't know what happened. You doubted that Mr. Holden mentioned it, and you never had. You wondered if you should tell him. It was a long time ago, but you were keeping a secret from Cove. I think I'm gonna tell him. I'm not gonna keep that secret from him anymore. I kept it, but I feel like we're at a point in our relationship now where he can know. You took a deep breath, a deep steadying breath to prepare yourself for the conversation. Now you just had to figure out how to tell him. Cove, I have something important to tell you. Hey, do you want to know something crazy? Okay, just be straightforward. Cove's head cocked to the side at your serious tone. He turned to give you his full attention. What is it? You stared into his bright ocean eyes. I'll tell him the truth. This happened back when you moved here. It was the first time I met your dad. There's not really any other way to say it, so he offered me $20 to be friends with you. Cove sat still. Uncharacteristically, there was an unreadable expression on his face. His eyes seemed to look through you, and you didn't know what to do next. Then, without saying a word, Cove stood up from his bed in a single motion, and he just bolted right out of the room. Oh no! For a moment, you didn't move a muscle. You were in shock. This was... oh no. Your senses quickly came back. You shot out into the hall after him. Cove! There was no response to your call. You could see Cove down the way. He had already sprinted back to the living room. His arms were stuck at his sides with his hands tightly balled into fists. He might not have been facing you, but you didn't need to see his face to know how he felt. Cove was furious. His parents were nearly finished setting the table. They greeted him, none the wiser of what was about to happen.
Huh?
Hey, what's up? When did you start running in the house?
Are you that famished?
You were able to catch up in full and stand near Cove. The parents' words didn't even register in his ears. Their child was wholly focused on another matter. He was practically shaking. Cove took one more step forward and glared up at his father's face.
You paid Jamie to be friends with me?
Mr. Holden froze. He looked like a helpless deer caught in the headlights.
Seriously?
Clifford? Are you serious? He whipped his head towards Kira, his eyes wide and blinked rapidly.
It was only one time.
The admission elicited an aghast expression from his ex-wife. Mr. Holden raised his hands up to gesture defensively.
It seemed like a good idea when it happened.
She covered her eyes with one hand. It was clear that her patience was frayed, but she was not so shocked anymore. Mr. Holden bowed his head, rubbing the back of his neck guiltily. The fact that she accepted this as something he'd do so easily seemed to be the most crushing part. Cove just stood there, fuming silently during their little aside. His eyebrows furrowed painfully, and his eyes trembled. I feel so bad for Cove. He was taking it worse than you'd ever imagined. I know, I thought he'd get mad, but I didn't think he'd be this angry. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, but must have only been minutes, the tense silence was broken by Cove.
I don't want to stay here.
He immediately caught his parents' attention. They turned to him with twin expressions of worry.
Hey, wait a minute, bud. You don't have to do that.
It's alright.
There's still your room. We'll stay out of your way, I promise. Where could you go at this time of day? It's almost night.
No.
I can stay with Jamie.
He stormed out of the house without waiting for another response. You jumped as the door slammed closed behind him. I'm gonna follow him. I mean, that's my best friend. You didn't even take the time to say something to his stunned parents. You ran after Cove, shutting the door more softly behind you as you left. You spotted him easily. Cove hadn't made it far. He'd just reached the middle of the road. I'm just gonna follow quietly. That's what I do in those situations. You had already said enough. You walked a couple paces behind him, silent. Cove stomped forward, going across the street without hesitance towards your house. It didn't take long to approach the front door. You'd left it unlocked, so he yanked it open and went inside with you. By then, night fully came. The two of you stood tensely together in the middle of your living room. The night really hadn't gone as you imagined it would. At least Elizabeth wasn't around and your moms were out. You had no idea how you would have explained the situation to them, and you were sure Cove wouldn't have been up for that. He watched you from a distance. His expression wasn't hostile, but was not exactly welcoming either. I don't know what to say. I'll just say nothing. Cove shifted so his back was to you, then he crossed his arms over his chest. Are you mad at me? To your surprise, he actually responded.
What?
No.
It's okay.
I wish I'd known before, but I guess there's never really a good time to bring up something like that. You're not the one who did anything. His tone was clipped and insulting, though it was now fully clear that none of that negativity was towards you.
And we're actually friends, aren't we? It doesn't matter if you took it or not. You wouldn't pretend for years just because of Dad's money.
You nodded your head furiously at that. If there was one thing you didn't want this revelation to do, it was weaken your relationship. Of course we're friends. Cove seemed to appreciate your reassurance. The furrow in his brow eased a little.
Yeah, we are. I'm definitely not mad at you.
I should thank you for not letting him get to you, and for telling me it happened. My dad never would have. He's always like that. He just does things. He doesn't ask or tell me about it or anything. Cove threw his arms out, his features twisted in frustration.
There already was the thing with my mom coming to stay with us for the summer out of nowhere, and that was supposed to be a surprise I'd find out about. Who knows what other things he's done that I've never heard of? Does he even know how to think about someone else? How about what someone else might actually want?
He paused to take a breath, scowling. I'll just continue to listen quietly. Uninterrupted by you, Cove went on with his spiel. The worst part is, I know he doesn't do stuff for himself. He does things because he wants to make people happy. Cove blinked rapidly, and you noticed tears were gathering in his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with emotion. But he just makes everything worse, and then he's really sorry, and it's like it's your fault for not being happy that he was at least trying. And what if all his plans and always being so pushy did change things? What things? Cove finally met your gaze, his bottom lip trembling. You realized then that he was referring to you and him. What if he did make you stay away from me before we even got to know each other? His voice cracked as he forced himself to speak through the tears that began to fall in earnest. He did everything he could to say it, but the words were barely a whisper. Jamie, you were the best thing about coming here. Cove was honestly terrified over the idea that there was a chance the two of you might not have what you do. I'm gonna hug him. Cove readily accepted the embrace. He wrapped his arms around you in return. The grip was firm. Let anything your dad or anyone else did mess things up. I'm really glad we could. Please don't cry. Please don't cry. He sniffled and regretfully started to cry more. It was difficult for you to see, but it seemed a mix between sorrow as well as relief now. I'll try. You remained like that for just a little while. Then he scrubbed his eyes with the back of one hand. His gaze turned away from you, growing distant. He's like that with my mom, too. The anger he had begun to release bubbled back to the surface. Dad wants to make people happy, but he doesn't. The words landed scathingly hard. You were certain it'd crush Mr. Holden if he heard them. You'd never known much about his parents' relationship, but you thought you understood it a bit better now. I'm here for you. Cove just looked at the ground. As the two of you were stifled by the quiet, a thought came to your mind, abrupt and sudden. What about your fish? Remember that day when it happened? I remember that day. You ran to the hills behind the house, and Mr. Holden waited for you to come back while my mom's checked the park for you. That was when I met you for the first time, after he talked to me about you. Cove lifted his eyes just enough to see you. His head remained low. I remember, too. When we first moved to Sunset Bird, I felt like I lost my whole life. Maybe that's why he wanted to help you start a life here so much. His eyebrows scrunched up, and he seemed on the verge of tears once more. It was obvious Cove didn't want to think about his dad that way, but it was also hard not to right now. He must be conflicted over where to go from here. You might feel better than you do if you tried to make up with your dad. Your dad's... he still needs to stop being so forceful, though. Cove frowned thoughtfully. He didn't say anything, but you had a feeling he was taking what you said into consideration. I'm going back home. His face was set in determination. There was no way you could tell him to do anything else, even if you wanted to, so you only nodded.
I'm sorry.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm sorry about all this. Can I come with you? Yeah, why wouldn't you go? He smiled lightly. Just checking. Cove nodded and headed outside. You followed behind him. Once again, the two of you made your way across the street towards his house. He didn't pause at the door, he just opened it wide and went in. Cove's parents were sitting at the table, their heads bowed in silence between them. They snapped over at the sound of the door, relieved to see Cove return. Mr. Holden stood up so suddenly his chair squealed across the floor. Cove! Kira got out of her chair as well, but less dramatically. How are you feeling, baby? I wanted to talk to you. His parents looked over at him, their features soft. Cove instead snuck a glance at you. I'm glad I could be here for him, even though this is awkward. You stared back solidly, hoping you would convey your support with your eyes. It must have worked because Cove stood up a little straighter. Cove then fully faced his parents. Mr. Holden stepped forward cautiously, his expression twisting in dismay. I am so sorry. I should never have done something so stupid. It's okay. It really isn't. That was a boneheaded move if there ever was one. I was bribing an actual child, one I'd never even met before that day. Cove almost cracked a smile, though he quickly regained his composure. Then it isn't, but I want things to be okay anyway.
I'm sorry.
Cove, I'm sorry. Aww. Kira placed a hand on Mr. Holden's shoulder. Your dad doesn't believe there's something wrong with you, or that you can't make your own friends. He can explain. I know why Dad did it. He wanted me to be happy, that's all. He didn't think it'd be like this. It was an accident. Kira sighed heavily. A sad smile appeared on her lips. You're very grown up, Cove. Mr. Holden brought his hands up against his forehead and began to pace around the room. He didn't seem to know what to do with himself. He turned back around to face Cove and Kira. He looked more solemn than you'd ever seen him. I'm not going to do it again. I haven't done it again. Haven't tried to bribe more people, or haven't continued to step over a line without registering it? Both. He let out a heavy breath before shrinking down a little. It was impressive because he was pretty tall.
I'm trying.
I don't know. I don't think so. Cove's throat bobbed as he swallowed thickly. He looked like he was trying to gather all his courage. When he spoke up, his voice was small but firm.
You invited Mom here. His dad's eyes widened. Cove was ready to have a talk he had put off before. You didn't ask me if I wanted things to be like this, with both of you together again for just a little while. Mr. Holden's hand slowly returned to his forehead. He was stunned, as if someone had just hidden. I did it again, and I didn't even notice. What's wrong with me? Why can't I just do something right? Oh. At least Cove seemed relieved that he was able to say what he felt. He knew just how long he'd been holding it in. It was quiet for a long stretch. Mr. Holden had sat down in a chair, his shoulders dropped in, his head in his hands. He looked at Cove. He watched his dad and how genuinely he was struggling with what he'd been told. Cove glanced down at the ground, then looked back to his dad. I'm not angry anymore. Slowly, Mr. Holden met his son's eyes. I can try to talk to you about things and what I feel about stuff. I stopped saying that to you since everything happened. I didn't want to talk to you, but you won't have to guess if you know. Mr. Holden broke eye contact at that, shaking his head. My child shouldn't have to take care of me. You shouldn't have to make up for my shortcomings, Cove. I can fix things. I can still change. After having something of an outburst, Mr. Holden turned his face away and spoke more guardedly. Besides, I'm used to that already. I might not get it right, but not a thing would happen in what's left of this family if I wasn't making the effort. It's always me. What's one more thing to manage? Dad.
I see.
You're right, Cliff. I know. But I don't think Cove wants to take care of you. He just wants to understand. And he wants his dad to understand too. That's what matters, isn't it? It was still as Mr. Holden digested what Kira said. He stared down at his empty hands held out in front of him. When he looked at Cove again, tiny tears glimmered in the corner of his eyes. He got up and crossed the room to his son. Cove didn't move or look away as he approached. Mr. Holden set his hands on Cove's shoulders, the touch firm. He furrowed his brows. Bud, you and I are going to talk about every single thing that ever pops into our heads. For the rest of your life. He shook Cove forward and back a bit. Tears slipped down Cove's cheeks, but he was smiling. No, I don't want that. Mr. Holden began to smile too. It trembled at the corners, but it was genuine. I'm afraid it's the only way. Kira chuckled, even as she blinked away her own tears. Mr. Holden turned towards her. You better not thinking you can get away from this, Kira. The same is going to apply to you. You can't! He let go of Cove with one hand while he placed his other arm around Cove's shoulders. Then he faced Kira. Oh, yes, I can. He continued to talk as he walked in her direction, bringing Cove along with him. Oh, that's so cute. Then father and son were standing in front of her. Mr. Holden put his other arm around her. Now he had both of them in his arms. If you think the ideas that I actually go with are bad, you two are going to be amazed by the thoughts I decide against all on my own. Kira jokingly cringed at the concept. Cove smiled tearfully up at his parents. Thanks, Dad.
I'm so glad.
Thank you, son. But hey, you know what I'm thinking now? Cove wiped his face with the back of his hand, shook his head. God, no, you're an incomprehensible maniac. Mr. Holden laughed, not disputing her words. I'm thinking we should eat that dinner I painstakingly made. It's salvageable, just gotta heat it back up. Kira sighed in exaggerated relief. That we can manage, right, Cove? Yeah. Great, we're making progress already.
Well,
Though I don't even know how I'm going to start making this up to Jamie. Carrying that secret for all this time must have been quite the burden to bear. $20 is nearly not enough for all the hullabaloo. I'm sure you'll come up with something. Well, I, or we, will work on it. Okay. Cove ducked his head and spoke towards you. There was a tiny smile on his face. Do you want to stay for dinner still? You bet. I was promised a meal. Mr. Holden finally let go of his family. Kira patted him on the back with a contented sigh. You're very good boys. I'm so lucky. Cove shyly rubbed his arm, while Mr. Holden nervously rubbed his neck. Neither could make eye contact out of bashfulness. In that moment, they really did seem like father and son. Cove's family was nice, you thought to yourself. You were glad that you got to come over. Oh, that was wonderful. Oh. I'm so happy we decided to tell Cove. I feel like that was finally the right time. All right, so that is it for this episode. I will see you next time for Road Trip. I hope you had a good day, good week, good year, good life, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.